Hi there, I'm Lucas, All-Plays Accountant. That makes me the perfect guy to teach you Container, a beloved classic economic game. In Container, the player with the most cash at the end of the game wins. You make cash through selling these little containers. The trick though is that no one else knows how much your containers are worth until the end of the game. Let's start by setting up the board. First, piece together Container Island and the offshore bank and put them into the center. If you have our premium playmat, just roll that out onto the table. Next, let's get the resources in order. Place the cash supply somewhere where everyone can reach it. Set out a certain number of factories, warehouses, and containers according to this chart. Note that the number of factories are factories of each color. So in a 4-player game, put out 3 of each color for a total of 15. Pause here and consult this grid for how long of a game you want for your player count. Now, you can put all unused warehouses, factories, and containers back into the box. Next, let's prepare the offshore bank. Place the loan cards, bid tiles, and auction tokens next to the offshore bank. If you're playing with 5 players, use 2 auction tokens, otherwise just 1. Now, grab 1 container of each color. Randomly put 2 here at the top of the offshore bank and 1 here. The rest of the containers are returned to the supply. In the 3 slots along the bottom of the offshore bank, distribute cash like this. The center boards are now set up. Next, let's get everyone's player boards ready. Everyone will grab a player board, each with the name of the logistics company that they are running. I'm playing Port & Stuff Ltd. Each board has 2 sides, a fully illustrated side and a more minimalist side. The different sides are purely aesthetic and will not affect gameplay. Take your container ship and place it into the open ocean. This is basically anywhere you want on the table that's not a dock. Each player gets 1 warehouse and 1 factory. For the factory, take 1 of each color and then randomly distribute them 1 per player. Return unused factories to the supply if you're playing with less than 5 people. The warehouse and factory go into their corresponding free spaces here. Each player now takes a container of the color that matches their starting factory and puts it in the $2 slot in their factory area. Note that the player board is divided into 2 areas from this road, the factory area and the harbor area. Give each player $20 and 2 $0 bluff cards. You can exchange equal denominations with the bank at any time. Shuffle the scoring cards, then deal 1 to each player face down. You may look at your own card, but won't see any opponent's cards until the endgame scoring. The first player is whoever last captained a seagoing vessel. Alternatively, the last person to have sold something can go first. The game of Container is played in turns. Each turn, a player will take 2 actions. You can refer to your handy player aid for what actions you have available. When referring to your player aid, make sure you're looking at the side without the star in the lower left-hand corner. The side with the star is for the expansion, More Containers. Let's go over all the actions now. First is Build, which allows you to expand your operations. With the Build action, you can either build a factory or a warehouse. The cost to construct a new building is shown on the next empty slot of the corresponding building. When you construct a factory, you get to pick any color you want out of the factories that are still available. Factories and warehouses are a finite resource. If you want to build a structure, but there are none left in the supply, you cannot build that building. Next to both tracks are numbers, which show your storage limit. Buying more warehouses will allow you to store more containers in your harbor area, and buying more factories will allow you to store more containers in your factory area. For example, if this was your board and you wanted to purchase another factory, it would cost $9 and allow you to store up to 6 containers in your factory area. Likewise, if you wanted to purchase a warehouse here, it would cost $7 and allow you to store 5 containers in the harbor area. The next action is Produce, which is when you run your factories to create containers. Importantly, the Produce action is one of a few actions you can only take once per turn. When you produce, you have to pay wages. in the form of $1 to the player to your right. If you do not have a dollar, you cannot produce. After you pay wages, each of your factories produces a container of the factory's color. Take the containers from the supply and place them wherever you'd like on the factory area. At this point, you can also reprice any other containers in the factory area as well. Remember your factory storage limits. If you produce, you cannot create more containers than your storage limit. If you would hit your limit, you choose which containers to produce up to your storage limit. If you won't hit your storage limit, you must produce one container for each factory. You cannot discard containers to make room for new ones. For example, if I have these 4 factories but already have 5 containers in my factory area, taking a produce action would cause me to hit the factory storage limit. I would pick which 3 containers I want to make, and then maybe I reprice my containers lower to incentivize my opponents to buy them and open up more space for future production. How do your opponents buy containers? The next action is factory purchase, where a player purchases containers from someone else's factory. They pay the owner the container's asking price, then they immediately price those containers wherever they want in their harbor area. The buyer is also allowed to reprice all other containers in their harbor area. You can only buy from one player per factory purchase action. For example, if I want to buy this green, yellow, and red container from player B, I pay player B $9, and then I get to place those containers in my harbor area at whatever price I want. I also get to reprice the containers already in my harbor area. Once containers are in your harbor, they are ready to be shipped to auction where they'll eventually find their forever home. The 4th action is harbor purchase. If you have a ship in someone else's harbor, you can purchase containers to load into your ship via this action. You pay the owner of the harbor the container's asking prices, then immediately load those containers onto your ship. A ship can only hold a maximum of 5 containers, and you're not allowed to purchase containers if you don't have space on your ship. You are also not allowed to destroy containers on your ship to make room for other containers. Finally, you are not allowed to sail your ship to your own harbor. You can never buy your own containers directly from your own harbor. To get to the harbors, you're going to have to take the sail action. Sail allows you to move your container ship. The ports you're allowed to sail into include an opponent's harbor, container island, or offshore bank. In order to get to any of these ports, your ship must first enter the open ocean via another sail action. For example, player A's ship cannot move directly from player B's harbor into player C's harbor to buy more containers. The ship must first move from player B's harbor into the open ocean, and then take another action to sail into player C's harbor. An opponent's harbor, the offshore bank, and container island all have special actions that trigger when your ship sails into port. These are called anchor actions and do not count towards your 2 actions per turn limit. You must perform the anchor actions immediately when your ship arrives, no saving them for later. When you sail into your opponent's harbor, you may immediately perform a harbor purchase action. This means that it usually is more efficient to make a purchase from the harbor right after you sail in, instead of taking a whole action just to buy containers. However, it's also possible for the opponent's stock and prices to have changed by the time the next turn has rolled around. So use your best judgment. When you sail to the offshore bank, you can take a free anchor action to load any number of containers from your holding area onto your ship. We'll go over the offshore bank in more detail here in a little bit. When you sail to Container Island, you immediately trigger an auction. Note that right after an auction, your turn ends, even if you had an action left. So get those ducks in a row before you sail into the auction. Speaking of auctions, let's talk about them, since they'll be your main method of acquiring containers. When you sail a ship into Container Island from the open ocean, you immediately trigger a single auction for all containers on that ship. Each player, besides the owner of the ship, will place money cards face down, forming their secret bid. This is where those $0 bluff cards come in if you want to trick your opponents. Once everyone's ready, all cards are revealed. Whoever bid the most amount of money wins the auction, and everyone else can return their money to their hand. All players return all 0 cards to their hand after each auction. Every player should always have 2 0 cards. At this point, the owner of the container ship has 2 options. Option 1 is that they can accept the highest bid, giving the containers on their ship to the winning player. The winning bidder gives their bid over to the owner of the ship, and then those containers are transferred to the winning player's storage on Container Island. In addition to the bid, a government subsidy will also kick in, giving the shipper the highest bid from the general supply. This means that the owner of a container ship gets double the highest bid for auctioning off the containers, the highest bid from the winning bidder, and an equivalent amount from the supply. However, the owner of the ship also has a second option. They can decide to buy out the highest bid and keep the containers for themselves. If the owner wants to institute a buyout, they pay an equal amount of money as the highest bid to the offshore bank. More on that later. And they will place the containers in their own storage area on Container Island. In this case, the highest bidder will return the money they bid to their hand. If there's a tie for the highest auction, those players immediately head to a runoff auction. They leave the money already bid on the table, but take back any $0 cards. Then they hold another auction, adding additional bids face down to their bid already on the table. Whoever wins the runoff auction is the winner, and their runoff auction is added to the initial bid to form the total winning bid. If the runoff is also a tie, the owner of the ship gets to decide who the winning bidder is. Back to actions. Let's quickly chat about repricing. The reprice action allows you to change the prices of any containers in either your factory or harbor area. In general, it's more efficient to reprice as a byproduct of the produce action or the harbor purchase action, but if you're totally stuck and just need to make your wares more enticing, you have the out of using an auction reprice. Now that we've covered the basic journey for a container, let's take a closer look at the other island, the offshore bank. In general, the offshore bank provides you with alternative ways to exchange extra containers for cash or extra cash for containers. The final action on your player aid is called call bank. Just like the produce action, you can only use this action once per turn. When you call the bank, you get to participate in bank auctions. If you call the bank and there's no ongoing auction, you get to take the auction token and start an auction on any of the 6 lots on the offshore bank. If you start an auction on one of the container lots, take the cash bid tile and place it in front of you. If you start an auction on one of the cash lots, take the container bid tile. Place your initial bid on that tile, signaling the beginning of an auction. If you start your turn and still possess the tile, you've won the auction. However, after an auction is started, any other player may use the call bank action to outbid you. Let's suppose you're bidding on container lot 1. You start the auction with the call bank action, and you start with an initial bid of $2. You then pass the turn. Player B looks at that lot and thinks, I want those containers. They perform the call bank action and bid $4. You would take your $2 back, and they would put down $4 onto the cash bid tile and take possession of it. The auction winner clock has effectively reset. If it gets back around to the beginning of player B's turn and they still have the tile, they've won the auction. But maybe player C thinks that lot of containers is worth more to them than $4. So we'll see how many times players outbid each other. When outbidding someone, you must always put in a higher amount, either at least $1 more or at least a container more. Any bids are effectively frozen, meaning they are stuck on the tile and you cannot touch them until you get outbid. You always bid for container lots with cash and for cash lots with containers. Let's take a closer look at bidding with containers. The container bid tile is split into 2 sections, factory and harbor. You can bid containers from either your factory area or your harbor area, but you must mark where they came from by placing a reserve token to replace your containers. This is because those containers still count towards your storage limits. The token serves as a memory aid, so you do not violate your storage limits. To outbid someone in containers, only the number of containers matter, not their color. 4 containers of any color always beats 3 containers of any color. If you are outbid on containers, take your containers off the tile and return them to the appropriate areas on your board. When you return those containers, you are allowed to reprice the containers you were using to bid, but they cannot change areas. When you win an auction, distribute the winning bid into the corresponding lots, starting with 1 and going to 3. For a cash auction, take the cash you've won into your hand and remove the auction token. For a container auction, distribute the winning bid similarly to the cash lots 1 through 3, and the containers you've won go into the holding area on the offshore bank. Remember when we were talking about sailing? And I mentioned that the free anchor action for sailing into the offshore bank was to load up containers from your holding zone? This is how you get those containers into that area. Containers that are kept here will be worth some points at the end of the game, but if you want to use them for container island auction, you have to come pick them up with a ship. Some final notes about auctions. The winning bids for auctions always goes into the lots of the offshore bank. Once an auction has started on a lot, the amount of resources in that lot cannot change for any reason. Think of the auction token as a blocker. For example, in a 5-player game, you can have 2 auctions going at the same time, though it must always be 1 container auction and 1 cash auction, never 2 of the same. If the container auction completes before the cash auction does, the winning bid is distributed to the other lots like this. And the lot currently being bid on does not change. If a player wins an auction, they cannot start another auction on the same turn. At some point on your economic adventure, you may find yourself low on cash. Don't worry, it happens to the best of us. In times like these, you can ask the bank for a loan. Taking out a loan is a free action that you can take on any player's turn. To take a loan, take $10 from the supply and a loan card. At the very beginning of your turn, before you check your auction wins or take any actions, you must pay loan interest. For each loan card you have, pay $1 to the offshore bank, remembering to skip any currently active auction lots. You can have a maximum of 2 loans at any given time, which will also mean you'll be paying a maximum of $2 in interest each turn. When your financial fortunes reverse, you can pay back a loan as a free action anytime on your turn by returning $10 and the loan card to the supply. Watch out though, the bank can be vicious. If your turn starts and you don't have enough money to cover interest, the bank will start to seize your containers. For each dollar in interest you cannot cover, the bank will seize a container from the first location you have according to this hierarchy. The player to your right decides which containers to seize if a choice has to be made, and those containers go on the offshore bank. Loans can help you in a pinch, but make sure to pay them off. The game ends when the supply runs out of any 2 colors of container. The active player finishes out their turn and then the game is over. Let's move into the endgame scoring. First, we have some upkeep to perform. If there are any outstanding auctions, whoever possesses the auction tile will win the auction immediately. 1 cash is taken into the hand and 1 containers are put onto the offshore holding area for your company. Next, let's take a look at Container Island. This is when you finally reveal that secret value card that you were dealt at the beginning of the game. Each color of container is worth a different amount of money to each player based on their value card. Notice that each card has a 2 valued container color. What this means is that this color of container is worth the number on the left if you manage to get a container of each color, and worth the amount on the right if you didn't. Next comes the biggest twist of scoring. You must remove the color of container you own the most of. If there's a tie, you choose which color to remove. Then you sum up the values of your remaining containers, and that is the total added to your cash in hand. Here are a couple scoring examples. Player A has 4 blue, 4 white, and 1 red container. In final scoring, since they have a tie for most common color, they get to decide which color to eliminate. Since their card had white containers much more valuable than blue containers, they eliminate blue containers, which gives them 4 times 10 plus 6, meaning they acquired $46 from their endgame haul. Player B has 1 container of each color, but 2 white containers. Thus, they must eliminate their 2 white containers, but will score their 2 value container with the higher value. They have 2 plus 10 plus 10 plus $4 from their containers, which sums to $26. Containers outside of Container Island can also be worth some cash. If you have containers on your ships or in your holding areas in the offshore bank at the end of the game, those are worth $3 a piece. Containers in your harbor area are worth $2 each. Unfortunately, containers in your factory area are worth $0. Finally, you'll have to pay back your outstanding loans, plus 1 round of interest, so $11 per loan. At this point, count up your money in hand, and whoever has the most money wins. In case of a tie, the number of containers in players' factory areas is the tiebreaker. If it's still a tie, the victory is shared. And that's Container. If you need to reference any section in this how-to, we have a timestamp table of contents in the description. If you like this game, try the networks, where you hire the best stars, sign the best shows, and run the best television network. For more auction games, try our version of High Society, a Reiner Knizia classic. If you love bidding, QE is a bidding game with no bid limits. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Allplay. Until next time, happy gaming.